Jack here, JBF Music and Guitar Lessons. In this Pro Guitar Tips we're analysing the style of Uli Jon Roth, pretty much the original neoclassic shredder, but there's so much more to him than just fast scalar runs like the Scorpions' 1977 hit Sails of Sharon. On a side note, this might have been where the Phrygian dominance scale started in metal. If you've got any other songs that predate this, fire it down in the comments. I also suspect a young Yngwie might have seen Uli in concert or on TV like this and been quite inspired, or at least listened to him. I could be totally mistaken, but there seem to be a few too many similarities in this area of their playing, guitar choice, in that clip anyway, and even picking style to some extent. So as you probably gathered from the intro example, I'm looking at other areas of playing, including gear, dynamics, bends, compound bends, pre-bends, some other little tricks, vibrato, neoclassic ideas, bluesy influence, and lastly his note choice. Okay, dynamics. First off, we got a pretty clean amp sound. So obviously using different channels or turning off a drive pedal will help here. Secondly, he's a bit of an avid knob fiddler, which is a bit hard to replicate on a Strat. So on that note, his Sky guitars seem to have changed a bit over the years, so I'm going to quickly talk about them and his rig. If you just want the playing tips, all the time codes will be pinned in the comments and the description so you can jump about at your leisure. They have a volume pot alongside 20 dB boosts for treble, mid and bass, rather than just standard pickup volumes. 100 dB master volume, and a preamp on-off switch. So instead of channel switching or using a pedal like most of us mere mortals, he'll just use his onboard boosts to drive the amp harder. And he'll frequently use these alongside his 5-way pickup selector to adjust his tone on the fly. The idea being he could get a Strat, Tele, Les Paul or hybrid sound all in one guitar. His Sky guitar is a stereo out, so one side is a sound and the other is phantom power for all the aforementioned effects, really putting my own heavily modded guitar to shame. His extended 32 frets were supposedly to sound more like the range of a violin, although I didn't quite find any solid quote to back that up, with the higher notes being a tone apart rather than a semitone just at the very top there, so that they're not too small and fiddly or unusable as they probably would be otherwise. The fretboard also overlaps the neck pickup on the G, B and E strings. On the higher notes it produces a warmer, more muffled sound, which probably helps level out any potentially unwanted shrill kind of sounds you get from playing up that high. He scalloped the fretboards to make room for picking near the neck, and having seen Richie Blackmore off of Deep Purple do that, subsequently Uli preferred the feel and sound of this, he tried it out, so he's stuck with it ever since, except for I think the first 3 frets which seem to be unscalloped, although I could be mistaken there, or I might change model to model. There's a really cool cutaway there, which I'm sort of surprised isn't more standard in rock and metal, because it really makes getting to those high notes much easier. You know, if you're trying to string skip, you've got this bit getting in your hand. And I hadn't realised how integral his guitar was to his sound, and I hadn't really intended to cover it in this video, but when I was looking into it, it just seemed too an important subject to simply gloss over. His amp of choice, I think, is still the Black Star Artisan 100, which is based off of his favourite Marshall Plexi. A humble pedal board which might typically consist of a blue guitar amp 1, a Boss Super Chorus, a Black Star or maybe some other various chorus pedal, 2 carbon copy delays, a tube screamer, a fuzz face clone and a whammy DT. His pick attack is generally quite soft, but can vary and is an important part of his dynamics. Live he tends to use a thicker pick so they don't blunt as easily, but prefers a thinner pick for more high-end sort of snap and clarity in the studio. I'm not sure how well this will translate after YouTube compression, but here's a quick example. So this shark spin is a really thin plectrum, it should sound a bit snappier, a bit brighter. Compared to the jazz. I'm not too sure if you can hear that, but at my end here, this pick is a bit duller, the thicker one, compared to the shark's fin, the thinner one, which is a bit brighter and, as I say, snappier. His hand positions and pick angle will often shift for varying tonal shifts as well, so you'll see him picking over the neck in some sections, or closer to the bridge in others. Finally, he'll employ volume swells, as well as partial swells, so swelling from 0 to a higher volume, as well as something more subtle like say a 2 to a 7, and then going back down, which really adds a lot of emotion. I've transcribed the solo as best I can for this guitar, so what I'd suggest doing is having a listen to the real thing, watching how much he actually knob fiddles, and seeing if you can incorporate these ideas into your own guitar setup. So to recap the dynamics part here, you can use pedal-based drives, the valve of an amp on a clean channel, various onboard power knobs which he uses for tonal effects, and most of us would just have to use a pedal here. His volume control, the pick attack, the pick angle and position. Key things to take away here really, the frequency with which he adjusts the knobs, the volume swells, and also the partial swell, which I think is a really cool trick. So with that in mind, that's exactly how we start this solo. We've got a volume swell. Actually, not only a volume swell, because it sounds very much like he's employed some very light pan muting on the G string for a smoother sound. So a very light mute, and then swell the volume up to maybe 3 or 4. Technically this might also be a pre-bend because we don't really hear the note go up, which is conveniently the next topic. You'll notice these pop up all over the solo are in fact much more common than the standard bends here. So at this point I'm going to highlight that these topics will overlap and there's a lot of fluidity so we can better analyse this solo. So we should probably take some of the next points into account as well. Vibrato. Uli has a fantastic vibrato. I suspect he might use gauge 8s, or at least have a very kind of slack string, like not very much tension at all. The scalloped frets probably help here as well. Recently I just put some 10 to 9 hybrid strings on this guitar. I'll pop a card linking to a review of them in the top left, is what I've got to say about it. Anyway, his vibrato, particularly on bent notes, is generally quite narrow and fast, but usually very well controlled, which gives a mature, contemplative sound, rather than an erratic, youthful one, which might be more like that. So the real secret to Uli's vibrato is that he seems to be able to do it almost straight away. I need to tend to hold the note for a little bit, get the feeling in my head, and then add the shallow vibrato. When it's a wide one, it's okay, but when you're just doing a shallow one, I tend to need to bend, hold the bend, then bring it in, just for a bit of security. Uli Jon Roth can more or less just launch straight into it if he wants to, which I'll hold my hands up as something that is very much a work in progress for myself. To that end, the G string, I'll usually pull this note down for more control. I just have more power that way. It's sort of cheating, but we'll give a much better example for the purpose of teaching here. I'm torn whether to include tabs or not for this because I think it might take away from the theme of the lesson, which is very much about analysing the often elusive idea of feel. And the tab might encourage to learn the notes but ignore the nuances, which is where the feel comes from. And speaking of notes, I'm going to be talking about note choice, but focusing pretty much just on the first beat of every bar, where the chord changes so we don't get too bogged down in what is essentially a D minor solo. So the bend targets A, the 5th of D minor. We have a nice little melody after this, targeting the 6th of B flat G. One of the few times Uli strays from a chord tone in his solo in reference to the first beat anyway. We also have some knob fiddling. It looks like he's going for a bit more bass, so maybe rolling off some tone for the equivalent of a strat. And then we have an E over the A minor. It's 5th, a choice we'll be seeing much more of later on actually. He's either switching to the neck pickup here or double checking he's on it at this point as well, so just make sure you're on the neck for here on out. Picking over the fretboard here, a pre-bend pops up again. This time a pre-bend from out of key, a bit like Marty Friedman, lesson card on the top right there. Then a really cool idea, which is our next area we'll look at, compound bends, or possibly using a finger to raise the pitch after said bend. I've done a lesson on these recently, so again, card on the top right. But if we just put our finger down, this note is quite plainly out of key, so I'm fairly sure Uli doesn't use his little finger here. But instead what he might do is put his ring finger down, but with a little extra pre-bend, just to bend the note a bit higher into pitch. I've never come across this exact technique before to the best of my knowledge, so was really happy when I happened across it here. Having said that, he might just be doing a compound bend, or more specifically a compound pre-bend. which I think on second listen to it, I think that probably is the case. I think that's what he's doing. Lesson card in the top right if you want some more information on prebends there. But essentially what this gives us is a G to an A over the D minor. G being the fourth of D minor, which if you know the song is often referenced in the rhythm, the little twiddly bit, creating a sus4 in passing. So that G obviously an octave lower than what we're doing in the solo, and it is quickly resolved to D minor's fifth, which is A, with the bend. We release this fairly slowly, then have a bit of vibrato, and I should point out the original version, Doctor Doctor by UFO, has lots of volume swells and sort of whale noises in the intro, so Roth is clearly wanting to invoke that to some degree, and those first bars slowly with the full explanation. So we've got the volume down, we're doing a light palm mute on the G, rolling the volume up and bending, adding vibrato. Very staccato on these next two notes. Little legato down. Then pre-bend, push it up. Release the pitch, and a very kind of subtle vibrato on this note here, and without speaking. Next up, a bend, but hit a bit harder this time, with perhaps a slight volume swell, and again that lovely narrow fast vibrato. Again targeting A, the fifth of D minor, another simple melody line, then a pre-bend with vibrato, a little slide, targeting C, A minor's flat third. We just have the note A by itself. And then a pre-bend with a volume swell. Really nice bit here. It's hitting E, the ninth of D minor, but resolving to the root. Overbent a bit there. That's probably my highlight of the solo. I really, really like that bit. I think it really pops out. So next we've got some of the neoclassical influence coming through a bit more strongly. Although I point out that the whole solo employs a lot of rubato. That is not strictly playing in time so as to allow more expressive playing, elongating and shortening passages as desired, whilst retaining an overall consistent tempo. So you might want to rush one bit and then hold back on the next bit and that sort of thing. Generally he's playing a bit behind the beat, giving that mature, confident sound. And those 4 bars. So I call that bit neoclassical because it's using a more contemporary scales than the pentatonic one, which in this day and age isn't anything special, but you have to think about in context. If you check out Sails of Sharon by Scorpions, where Uli's playing there, he's doing like neoclassical stuff, so he was really ahead of the curve. I'd say the kind of the godfather of neoclassic hard rock in my eyes anyway. So then we have a really cool move. We're bending the G up to A, the fifth of D minor, which you probably noticed happening an awful lot here. It is a good interval to go for. Then what we're doing is using another finger to raise the pitch, just a semitone here. Probably an increase in volume here as well, and perhaps picking near the neck so it's not quite as vicious. And, you know, that good vibrato again. The same idea over the B flat, giving a kind of a major 7. Resolving to the root when the other finger's added. And then a little trill, sliding down to E, which is A minor's fifth. A large jump with a slide up the E string going down to A. Try that a bit more cleanly. There we go. Again, D minor's fifth. A quick roll up of the volume, he does that here. I think he's more or less at full volume here. And picking in a more standard place that's not as close to the neck anymore. A real neoclassic lick and great regal trill. Using A to lead into the D, the root of the underlying chord, with a volume increase again. Back to picking near the neck, that thing, with a more bluesy line. And then a 3 semitone pre-bend. Being released, going to D, B flat's third, followed by some legato downwards. Going to G. Then we have a kind of pre-bend on G here. So it's A minus flat 7th, but we're kind of bending it to get this bluesy thing. And in particular, you can really hear Uli's blues skills coming through on that little lick. He's clearly very well versed in this style, very subtle nuances that just make it sound more authentic. So we got that. Sliding down to D. The root of the underlying chord, a little pentatonic lick, and then very quietly going down the scale, resolving to the D an octave lower, and allowing space for Michael Schenker to come in with his own solo. So I suspect there's probably a volume roll just for that last lick as well, or they might just be picking incredibly softly. So here we should go. And I'll just run through the whole thing at a much slower speed. So to recap all of that, first off we had dynamics, which include pick angle, position, attack. We've got his onboard effects as well, the Marshall he's using obviously, which you could get away with using a pedal or something, or channel hopping. We've got pre-bends, vibrato, bending out notes into key, neoclassic lines and ideas, combined with more standard blues rocks leads. It really is a great, probably underrated player, and I really wanted to do a lesson on him, but didn't want to just show his licks, because I think this is a better, or at least more holistic approach to looking at his playing. A bit of an experiment in that regard, so let me know if this has been any use. But yeah, if you like other neoclassic stuff, you might want to check out my Yngwie lesson, or some of the How to Sound Licks videos I've done, the card up there. But yeah, hit subscribe, share, and enable notifications with that little bell on the side if you feel so inclined. Cheers guys.